Hello, and welcome. It is, of course, Tuesday. Probably. As well. Some of you may know I am, of course, 2 days ahead due to the way our calendar works. It's not like I'm in the future, just our calendar's 2 days ahead of yours. As you can see by our, well, I mean, obviously the date says it's 7,895, but it's the Galactic Standard Calendar. It's not like it's your future or anything. It's exactly correlated. We use a different calendar system than you is all. It's not too important. Today is, of course, Tuesday, in which we will be working on Galactic Requiem work. Workday Tuesday. It doesn't rhyme. Newsday Tuesday rhymes, but it's not Newsday. I mean, it is, but it's not, if you know what I mean. I mean, I have no news to bring you, so it's not Galactic Newsday Tuesday. So, let's work on work. Of course, you'll be working on Galactic Requiem as per usual. What else are we going to work on? It's, sort of the thing we do here. Okay. So, assuming I can arrange my plans of what I want to actually work on, let's put it this way. I have so much to work on. And so much. So when working on Galactic Requiem, there are... Well, let me tell you about what we do here. Of course, for those of you who know, Galactic Requiem is, of course, a TTRPG based on an old series of stories. Short stories, and eventually a novel at some point. A series, technically, but a bunch of old stories, short stories. And, well, the TTRPG system is used to simulate the universe in the way that it's supposed to work. However, we are obsessed with having systems for everything. Everything. If you can buy stuff We need trade rules. If you can trade on the space stock market, we need space stock market rules. How do starships work? We need starship rules. We have all of this. Always searching for more and tweaking rules and perfecting rules. But we have basically a groundwork for everything, unless I've missed something. But I'm pretty sure I haven't missed anything. Everything I've learned that I've missed, I've made a system for, so we have most things. Most things in more detail than they should have. Not as much as some systems. For those of you who've seen my many ramblings, you know that the system called Traveler goes a bit deep into details. We don't go that deep. We don't care about the. So the best way I could put it is genuinely in Traveler, they have the RGB red, green, blue visual for eyes theoretically calculable. Why? I don't know. I suppose it's relevant somehow. Like it they've gone very far in some places and not very far in others, and it's confusing as to why. We, of course, don't go that detailed because we're not insane, I say. But then again, we do have a backup system for Delta V, for ship engines, not that ships use Delta V in Galactic Requiem, because the majority of ships are using light warp-enabled engines and acceleration to let them go fast. So you don't really need to worry about Delta V with the fusion engine, particle reaction, fusion core, particle reaction engines, and light warp enabling. You don't usually need to worry about that thing, but just in case some tech level 10 nation decides to do something, tech level 10 is like your Earth tech, we have the possibility to use Delta V calculations. Which, like, just in case. So, there's areas in which, but we try and keep things a bit less complex, but at least have a rule set for everything. So, there are, well, for the longest, you've probably heard me complain about formatting. Formatting books is the most annoying part of everything I do here. Formatting books is a pain. Because it's all just, it's not even fun work. So we're not going to work on that. Not here on Workday Tuesday. We're going to work on at least stats or a little bit of world building, I suppose. Stuff like that. The funner stuff. Even if the formatting is something I need to eventually do. So, we'll of course ramble. As it is all. It's the thing we do, isn't it? So, to begin, I suppose we'll start with recently, I have been going over and working on weapons. Weapons and weapon prices. Basically stat blocks. Not only weapons, technically everything. But I've been currently focusing heavily on weapons. Because we have a bunch of, like, missiles and rockets and stuff like that. But very recently, it's come to my attention that we don't have pricing. And so I've been trying to I say standardize, not really, but sort of make a way to easily calculate prices on weapons. I say weapons. It's easy to calculate prices on, say, an assault rifle. Easy. Calculate prices on a pistol. Easy. Shotgun. Easy. Any of that stuff. easy. That's not what I mean when I say calculating prices on weapons. I can even stat those things easily. I can stat anything easily, I'll be honest. Statting, I've been doing for the many, 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 many years that we've been working on Galactic Requiem. I've gotten to the point in which, basically, I mean, little tangent, my players, in one of my campaigns, decided to, due to random circumstances beyond my foreseen plot events, I let my players do whatever. It's an open world game. But basically, they skipped an encounter with exceptionally good rolls, and just through random circumstance, found a train, an armored train. This was unexpected by me, but armored train. Now, do I need to stat a train? No, I already have a train. Of course I have a train stat. Why would I need stats for trains? Of course we already have stats for trains and all the different modules you can put on a train, of course. Now, if you want different variants of trains, we can modify the base generic train stats, of course. It's easy. It's an armored train, however, so of course I need to do a little bit of statting on how to armor a train, which usually just adds increasing its damage reduction. If we really care, the power of the engine might be decreased by the armor of the train, meaning we might decrease its speed and so forth, or the amount of cars it can pull, etc., etc. But we already have the base stats for a train. Armoring the train, easy. Now, if you're wondering why we already had the base stats for a train, of course, logistics. Do you think I didn't make an entire logistics system for the nation rule system, even though we wouldn't need the full stat block for the train for the logistics system on the planetary scale? Of course, I statted the full train for the logistics system for the planetary scale logistics network, because I need to know how much a train can pull so I can convert that into the amount of military units or supply units or goods units a train can pull, so I can determine that, so I can determine how many trains it takes to move 1 unit of goods on the nation scale. Yes. So we already had train stats. Anyway, if there's anything we don't have stats for, we will stat it. We will stat it rapidly. Now, what's more complex than statting something is pricing it. Pricing is slightly more complex than statting. Statting things I can basically do in my sleep. Accurately statting Elysian things takes a bit of work and research. Statting galaxy-based things, easy. Because I can just, I don't need to, I can look up on the data net its pricing instantly. I can look up, well, its speed instantly. I can look up its pricing instantly. Well, no, not pricing, sorry. I can look up its speed instantly. I can look up any of its stats instantly, then convert them to game stats for anything in the galaxy. Elysian things, I need to do research. And unfortunately, your Elysian network architecture is in zeros and ones and not neural connections, so I can't just download it directly into my brain because you use some sort of out-of-date zeros and ones computation. It's complex to work with. And that's actually in the law too. Elysians, you use some zeros and ones system, binary and so forth. Your computer system architecture is not galactic network architecture. It's not the galactic standard. So you have, actually, Elysians have a bonus to defense against being hacked by anybody else because of your archaic network architecture. Somebody would have to study how your computers work first. Anyway. So, basically, looking up stats for things from your Elysian stuff, slightly more annoying. But looking up stats for Galactic stuff, easy, can do it in my sleep. Coming up with the value of these items, far more complex than figuring out the stats for them. Because value involves calculation based on the stats, so you need to do a bunch of calculation to get the monetary cost of things. But yes, statting things easy, pricing things hard. That's the basics of it. I say hard, just time consuming. So, well, one of the things that we don't really have an easy way to price is heavier things. Basically, we can price ammo up to 20 mil, 30 mil even. Once we get into pricing tank rounds, bombs, missiles, we can stat them easy, but pricing them takes time and work. A lot of time and work. Statting them easy, pricing them hard. So I've been trying to make a bunch of pricing calculations for missiles, bombs, rockets, all that stuff. And that's what I've been working on a bit recently. When I say working on weapon prices, we also need to actually expand and make a lot of everything. Admittedly, I've been putting off making a lot of everything because it just feels like secondary work. How do I put this? I say secondary work, less important to do. I feel formatting and rules systems, while harder to do per se, and necessarily more boring for formatting, are more important than having a variety of different stat blocks, debatably speaking. Because, because as stated, I can stat in my sleep. So, basically having, well, how do I put this? Hey, I want to buy a gun from this world. Okay, let's roll some variants. 2 1s on 2d6s. Not ideal. So, obviously, the weapon here is underpowered in its range and its damage. So we can quite easily modify a base stat template for the base weapon. We can easily modify and generate it, slap a few strings, I say strings, I mean like string of numbers, on the weapon to determine where it's from, etc. Slap all that on, and we have a new custom weapon for that area. Like, it's exceptionally easy to modify the templates to do anything because it's so robust. The system is already robust. So we can easily generate vehicles, weapons, items. We can easily generate all that. So I find making lists, which is one of the things on our list to eventually do, but I find making lists of like items and such not a priority. Because if my players ever want to buy something, I can stat it easy. I can modify those stats easy. Pricing harder, but still, it's not like there's some separate system we need. I can price it easy. So I always view that as secondary work, work that I put off till other work gets done. But it's something I eventually need to do. Okay. Let's see. Let me actually open my big book of things that need to be done. Yeah, well, assuming it ever loads. Here we go. Work that I have on my list of things that I really should do. Better define casting effects, cost tiers, and all that. Better define hacking effects, cost tiers, etc. Better define sanity, stress, and so forth. All those systems are in place and work, but they need a bit of definition and formatting, to be honest. A little chart, at the very least, that defines how it works. Because every time I go through it, I need to scroll back and forth a little bit to determine exactly how. I need a top section on each of those that's these are the steps to do it. A little, thing that a player or even me can read and go, okay, so this, and this. Because the systems are in place, but it's not explained in a way I find acceptable for players. And by that I mean it's not like, strangely enough, as simple as this sounds. To cast, choose what you're trying to cast. Apply the modifiers, roll a d20. Ooh, we rolled an 18. Apply your modifiers, check it against the DC result of the modifiers applied by what you're trying to do, and then determine result based on the amount above and the feats you have, and etc. As simple as that sounds, and it is simple, there's also things you can do to modify it, like if you're trying to decrease casting point cost, and are you trying to overcast, etc., etc. So there's modifiers and so forth. But explaining all that in one section, like overcasting rules, I don't mention in the base casting section, so we gotta basically, it's not, the rules are all there. I just need to define it better so it's simpler to look at and go, here's the steps and what you need to do. I need to do that. Same for hacking and casting, because they're separate systems. I suppose I also need to do a better bit of explanation for ship use. As it turns out, recently, as I figured out with one of my players, defining the way ships work needs a bit of definition. It's not a lot. Ships work very similar to people, as do vehicles and mechs. Generally, the way it works currently is I explain to players how it works. There's a brief overview, but it's in the rulebook. Don't get me wrong. There's a section in the rulebook that's here's vehicles, but it's not. It's also not set up in a way with an example. Like here's the steps. Here's an example. It's all the rules and options spread out across an entire segment. What I really need is sections that are here's the basic rules, here's the options. If you're doing this option, go here. If you're doing this option, go there. But here's how it works. I need segments like that in everything. Admittedly, even combat. Every section needs an actual explanation, really. The rules are all there and everything. It's just not the best explained. And it turns out apparently not even for combat. It's how do I put this? If you are doing combat in GR, you probably take one encounter to figure it out. You might learn more and learn your options over more sessions of combat, more sections of combat, but the basics are easy to grasp if you do it. The same applies for hacking. The same applies for starship use. The same applies for casting. If you do it and you go through an encounter of it, you get the basics. You don't necessarily get all the complexities, but you get the basics, and then you can ask questions and add the complexities on top of it. It's not hard to grasp, but having little explanation sections would make it a bit easier, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Because, okay, there's the rule book says, not in the it's not even in the combat section, but like, you know, the rule book says an attack is the roll of a d20, add your modifiers, see whether you beat the AC and hit. Okay, but it doesn't say, you know, like, I mean, here's the section on cover. Obviously, nothing says you probably want to take cover. You do, but nothing innately says that. Like, here's the cover rules. You can put 2 and 2 together yourself, I guess. You know, like, that's how it's set up. There's nothing that says cover is important in combat. It is, exceptionally so. There's nothing that says armor is important in combat. It is. There's nothing that innately says armor will decrease the amount of damage you take, therefore making sure you take less critical wounds. If you take this much damage, you will take a critical wound. There's nothing, you'd have to find the critical wound section and see that, and then put 2 and 2 together yourself. So ease of explanation could be better. Basically, the rules are very much a framework with all these additional sections that apply, but not really a human applicable explanation. Of course, once you shoot, if you shoot somebody and realize it's harder to hit them because they're in cover, maybe you might realize you want to be in cover too. Once you hit them and realize they've taken critical wounds, you might realize, yeah, maybe I should use this to my advantage and protect against this for happening to me. You know, like, using the system explains the system. Anyway, what else is on that list? Better definition for sanity. Definition of nation stuff. I'm always, for those of you who've been here for a while, you know I've always been working on tweaking nation stuff because nation stuff has been bugging me for a long while. I need to list vehicle construction rules. Update the contacts rules ever so slightly. A little bit of work on the social rules. Army lists for nation scale need to be set up. I need to actually work on some martial arts specials, maybe add a few martial arts moves. I need to differentiate a little bit on nanotech, bioengineering, and genetic modification. It works right now, but it's similar to robotics, which it should be rules-wise, but it needs some definition and modification in some differences that I probably haven't even thought of yet, of course. Add more world tags, work a lot on random generation stuff, add to and format the cybernetics rules and lists, add more to the items list, add more to the vehicles list, add more to the spell options list, add more to the hacking options list. mostly the lists of pre-generated ones. Because you can make spells and hacking programs yourself. There's rules for it, which also need some explanation. But adding little pre-generated lists would be helpful. A bit more definition on mutations and nano-augmentations and bioengineering. Format, bureaucracy. A little bit of definition and formatting on dramatic conflict. A lot of generators need work. World generators, world codes, that kind of stuff. Random generators. I need to do an in-depth test of hacking rules. So, of course, combat being the most common, has been put to the absolute test. We've tested combat left and right, up and down. We've tested vehicle combat a lot, a bit less than ground combat, but, we've tested a lot. Same with mechs and starships. It's all been tested heavily. Not necessarily as much as ground combat, but it's been tested heavily. By tested, I also just mean used. Hacking has been used a lot, but nowhere near enough. Like, it hasn't been stress tested, Not every possible situation around has been tested in hacking. So that needs work. I say work as in testing. Adding sanity disorders, defining some action dice costs, clarifying some nation and organization scale stat stuff. A little bit of work on the AI. Not actual in-game AI, I mean the GM bot, which isn't an AI, it's a series of charts, but adding more charts and all that, and some clarification on the where to go in certain sections of using it. Double checking rules. Adding items and all that once again. That kind of thing. Lots of work on that. And then, of course, items, lists, sectors, and using it all. I mean, there's no basic rules that aren't there. It's just a lot of adding, fixing and modifying rules, adding items, lists, that kind of thing, tweaking stuff, defining stuff, and formatting stuff. It's a lot of that. That's a lot of what we work on. Let's see. So, where to begin? Let's see. What would we be working on if we weren't here? We would be... Let me check the list of things I was going to work on. Oh yeah, lots of things. Lots and lots of things. Let's see. Well, let's look at what we were working on for World Building Wednesday. Well, I mean, we were supposed to actually work on encounter stuff. which we could work a little bit on preparing, and or we could work on actual work. We'll of course take this slow. Hmm. Okay. We will take this exceptionally slow because that's how I work on things. I am slow at figuring out what I'm going to work on, and then things pick up usually. Let's see. What do we need? What is exceptionally important that we work on? Things that bug me. Let me take a quick look at nation scale. I know I was looking at it the other day. I say the other day, it was a while back here. Was it based on population? I'm talking about nation modifiers. I'm pretty sure I based these optional stat modifiers on scale. Nations, here we are. One system subset can have more units based on base increase of upkeep, or alternatively the count larger scale groupings as multiple systems, or do it by system population. Either we increase upkeep or count larger scale groupings as multiple systems. And how would we count larger scale groupings? We'd do that by system population, wouldn't we? Which is why I do it by system pop. But what do we count as a world's average pop? Usually the world's average pop is 10 billion, with capitals being 20 billion. And if capitals are 20 billion, then we would assumedly use the average of 10. But it's by system pop. System pop. The average system pop is 10 times 10 for about 100. Of course, technically 110 because of the capital, but we'll round that down because, you know, like, we're not going to deal with that. So 110, no, round it down 100. Of course, you could have up to like near 30 objects in a system, I believe. But we'll go for every, which would make it up to 300, obviously, if 10 times 30. But in short, it's usually 10 or less. I mean, it's the average. You can have 0 things in a star system. You can have 1 thing in a star system. It's possible. So, with an average of 10, 100, so for every 100, you would have a system series, a system set. So if you have more than every 100 in the system, you're going to apply an additional modifier onto the thing. And I assume that's how we'd calculate it. So modifiers are per 100 pop. Therefore, what does that mean, actually? Now, if you're wondering, I cut out a little, I say cut out, but I mean like didn't mention a big part of that, I suppose. So, if you're wondering what that means, for example, the force mod is how many nation scale medium military units, 500k, depending on your scale, that would be divided by 10 for every scale down. You can upgrade past level 6 all the way up to level 12 for those military units. Now, the problem is if you have a Dyson swarm, you obviously have a higher population because you have a Dyson swarm. So it doesn't make sense that your nation scale would be limited to that many, even if you have a Dyson swarm. So, given that these are calculated per world loosely, but they all stack upward, every stat stacks upward. So, assumedly, we do it at the system scale because everything stacks up. So, eventually, you'd have to choose a scale to apply these modifiers at. So, we'd apply them at the system scale. And then for every 100 pop, we'd assume another system allowed. Because it doesn't make sense to just say it's per system, but the system is a Dyson swarm, therefore why would its number be so low? We should do it per pop. Therefore, easy solution. That might make no sense. It might sound like insane ramblings. Trust me, it makes sense to me. And if theoretically I write it all out, it'll make sense in writing. But that's how that works. But mostly, what have we done? We've stated what's already written there with a little bit of clarification. What does that mean? That means I have confidence in that that's how I want the system to work. I've basically confirmed to myself that that is how we are going to do it. Now, very quickly, I'm going to copy that, the writing that's already there. I'm going to scroll to the bottom of the section. I'm going to add a segment. I'm going to paste that in there. One system subject to more units when the base increase more. I'm not sure about upkeep. We'll keep that as a question. Or alternatively, count larger cells groupings as multiple systems. Grouping by system pop per 100 pop. There we are. So we have that. Not I've sort of confirmed. In this section, we now note that it states that we're going to be grouping them per 100 pop. Okay. Now, I'm iffy on increased upkeep. Should that increase the upkeep? Well, how would we calculate that? And we have to take into account the greater way nations work in the system. I know how to increase upkeep by a little bit, but keep it simple enough. An idea would be to have managing units. I say units, but I mean buildings. Stat scores are per system? Well, should they be per system or per subsector? I suppose that's the big question, isn't it? What was my previous thoughts on that? I know that I eventually decided the largest scale for nation management is the subsector. Now, nations can have more than a subsector, don't get me wrong, but that's the largest scale of management. Specifically, how do I put this? Defining things is also important. So explaining to you, or even just stating out loud to myself, helps me put together whether it's explained well and also find flaws or good bits about it by just explaining it. It helps. Often, I will ramble at my players about rules, and just by explaining them, I'll find solutions. It helps. Okay. So, basically, stat modifiers of nations. You have your world. It has stats equivalent to strength, X, con, int, wiz, char, basically. Well, technically, so do organizations. Every nation, all the way up, has stats. Generally, once you get to the smaller scales, they still have stats, but you divide. But basically, on the large galactic scale, there are three scales: world, system, and subsector. 1/10 of a world's modifiers apply within the system. 1/10 of a system's modifiers apply within the subsector, and 1/10 of a subsector's modifiers apply within the sector. Of course, you need management buildings to do this. You need a system administration hub and a subsector administration hub. What does it mean when I say 1/10 of a system, 1/10 of a world's mods apply within a system? I mean, if one world is trying to affect another world in the same system, only 1/10 of its stats would apply. Now, when dealing with one system to another, you add up all of the world's stats, every world in the system, and divide by 10. So, we actually have a little example here. World A, B, and C in System A have A plus 13, plus 7, and plus 6 in a skill due to building mods. Using their skills on System B, they get a plus 3 on that skill. If you're wondering how, 13 plus 7 plus 6 divided by 10 is 26, divided by 10 is 2.6, round up 3. 0.5's rounded up, less than 0.5 is rounded down. So that's how you get the total from one system dealing with another. There are, of course, buildings and so forth that you can build that help. For instance, a system administration hub basically allows you to use full stats of worlds in a system against each other, etc. Anyway, like I said, it goes all the way up. So 1/10 of a world onto a system, 1/10 of a system into a subsector, 1/10 of a subsector apply within a sector. Nation total is by subsectors to sector. So if subsector A, B, and C have those numbers, you can roughly equate a nation's, well, let's, oh, I accidentally hit a button there, that was not ideal. You can get nation totals by adding up subsectors, but you never actually add up subsectors in practice, if you know what I mean. How do I put that in explanation? I'm not writing that. I mean, how do I explain that to you? So if subsector A, B, and C in sector A have 13, 7, and 6, same numbers, but you get the point. In a skill, the nation's total in that skill is +3. However, efficiency is lost past the subsector scale in regards to skill stacking. Each subsector counts as having its own separate skill stacking modifiers. A nation at the sector scale that is split between sectors on the map still counts as acting as one sector, so long as it's no more than 150 light years distant from itself or its target. Scales get a +5 per scale lower, and vice versa. A subsector dealing with the system gets a +5 on its checks, dealing with the world gets a +10 on its checks. Skill bonus mods cap at 40 for each skill, and each skills for base buildings. Skill ranks and non-base skill models can bring it above +40, but that's additional modifiers. Using skills at distance of a -2 per additional distance away. Using a system mod on a system 2 lanes away takes a -4 on the result. Using the subsector 2 subsectors away takes a -4 as the result, but that's a subsector scats against another subsector. These modifiers are modified by your nation's status. A capital subsector has better modifiers, basically doesn't take the -2, only takes a -1 per distance or -1 per every 2 distances, etc., based on their modifiers. Nation management. Genuinely, I think I've said this before. Nation management is a spreadsheet, an actual spreadsheet. Now, a player doesn't need to use the spreadsheet. We can dumb it down to simplified sections and so forth, but there's an underlying spreadsheet that makes sure things are right. Anyway. Now, the question is, no, this per system works. The question was, I was going to ask is, should we remove the fact that subsector is the largest scale, should we move the stat going all the way up to subsector? But then that would throw off our calculations for amount of people per segment. So we'll keep it at the systems scale for stat modifiers in regards to the bonuses you get. Well, let's do a little bit of math on that, why don't we? 45 times 500. Now, if you wonder why I'm getting that random number 45, the maximum stat a nation can have is 100. 100 divided by 2 minus 5, 45. So 45 is the maximum modifier, and for every 1, you can have 500,000 people. So 45 times 500 gets us 22,500 times 1,000. So it is unlikely for a world, a full-on world, to have 22 million elite forces. You're not going to have 22 million elite forces per world in a system. Having 22 million elite forces, I mean, I say elite forces, mind you, we're talking up to level 12 as opposed to the average. Level 12 is considered high. So it makes sense that that would be per 100 billion. It works out. So we don't want to change that to the subsector scale. Otherwise, we'd have 22 million per not 100 billion, but per 1 trillion, which is a bit too little if you ask me. Hell, I think 22 million per 10 per 100 is maybe a bit low. Maybe it's on that line of acceptable. So we don't want to change it to subsector. That's my logic there. It works out. Because you can have other ways of making your forces elite and so forth. And the majority of the infantry are probably not, special forces. You're not going to have. See, the only problem is it breaks apart when you go to the lesser scale. Because you can have less, but still have that many. But that is sort of balanced by the fact that you need some amount of people to generate the funds you would need to keep your military and your stats that high and so forth. So it sort of works out because it's balanced out by the fact that there's so many other factors involved, trust me. So you would need upkeep for those units. The higher level the unit, the more upkeep they take, but that's a relatively small amount of upkeep. Getting your actual stats to 100 to get 45 to be able to times that by that, you would have to have 100 in your system stats. So you would need every subsystem to have numbers in its stats. Every world would have to have it up to a certain amount. Then you'd have to pay that much to get those stats that high. So you need to have supporting forces, I say forces, supporting worlds, or a strong enough economy to boost that to that amount, meaning you're going to need population or so forth to keep that money up because population correlates to money, etc., and you have to pull funds from elsewhere to fund that. In short, there are balancing measures. It's not like every world is going to have that. The average stat of a world is like 20 to 30. So you're not going to have 100. You're going to have 20 to 30, so you're going to have 10. 10 times, an average world's going to have like 10 times, well, system, more so than world. It's going to have 10. And mind you, when I say a system can have that many, you are going to have to split that many people on each world. Or concentrate them on one world, which I wouldn't do, but you could. So there's lots of things that manage and systems in play that affect these things. It's all... it's complex, and it annoys me, but it also works. Yes. Don't even get me started on imports and exports. We talked about that the other day. Talked about it as in on the World Building Wednesday, in which I made this section of map. You saw me working on trade. If you saw me working on trade, you know that I noted some planets as imports and exports. There's an entire system for trading goods, what planets want, what planets don't want, and how that affects the prices and all that. There's an entire underlying system for that. I should probably arrange where I put those systems, because they're sort of spread out amongst so many different books right now. Here we are, empire scale. 1d6 trade items are considered imbalances wanted for import. Repeats increased demand, 1d4 credit units worth of demand per item per pop unit, which theoretically changes every month. 2d6 trade items are set up for export. Repeats increased demand, and that changes every month. Yes, there are more imports than exports. There are less imports than exports. But that's because we here believe that a world is capable of being self-sufficient. Therefore, there are things a world wants, there are things a world will import, but any colony with its 2 cents is going to be able to be self-sustaining. They don't have, you know, many sci-fis are like, oh, hey, they have to import metal. Do you know anything about actual space? If you did, you know you don't need to import metal. Sure, you might want metal, which is why we have worlds having things they want to import because of prices. But an asteroid field is full of metal. A world is full of metal. There's pretty much nothing you can't get. Now, barren worlds might not have air. You can generate air. You can generate these things. You can, food. How are we going to grow food? Hydroponics, bioengineering. There are actual solutions that even work in your Elysian physics that mean that a world is not going to have, even if it's a barren world, it with enough funding, and if you have a city there, you're not going to need imports of a vast, like you can do it yourself. You can be self-sustaining. It's not hard to be self-sustaining even on a barren world or in a space station. It's not hard to be self-sustaining. Mine the asteroids. There's so much ore and metals in the asteroids. In fact, it was thought, if we talk about your Elysian star system, Sol, did you know that there aren't enough resources that basically one asteroid, if it's a resource-rich asteroid, if you were to just dump it, a reasonably sized resource-rich asteroid on Earth, you would imbalance the economy just because of how easily accessible and the amount of resources in asteroids. Like, things that are hard to mine, gold, etc., gems, rare resource, they're in asteroids. You can get all that in asteroids, if I remember correctly. So, like, there's just, like, and it's so much more easy to get, and there's a lot of it in asteroids. So, like, theoretically, you could even just imbalance the economy by bringing in a lot of asteroids. Point being, there are resources all throughout space, on barren worlds, whatever. Just because it's barren does not mean it's not resource rich. So just, you can be self-sufficient with a colony. It's not hard. Like, what was it? Your Elysian nuclear submarines. It's often stated that your Elysian nuclear submarines can stay underwater indefinitely. They're not pumping air in, they're scrubbing carbon dioxide and using chemicals and so forth, and power and water. Water is surprisingly abundant in space. More so than, like, whenever you see those I say shitty, but those shitty Elysian movies where aliens are invading Earth for its resources. No. They need its water. Water's everywhere. Everywhere. So there's an entire thing called a gas giant. It's called a gas giant because it's full of hydrogen and helium and so forth and other gases and elements. Guess what? There's also a thing called an ice giant. Guess why it's called an ice giant? Yes. Yes. Guess what the... Which one is it? The Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud are. Pluto. There are worlds with frozen all sorts of gases and liquids and frozen things. I say I forget the word for it, but chemical compositions. There are planets out there, if I remember correctly, that are so cold they have like liquid methane or so forth. Like, everything's abundant out there. The only thing you would invade Earth for is its biodiversity, I suppose. The bio stuff, not the chemicals, not the resources. It would only be the diversity in its life. And even then, if you're half competent and you can travel across space, you can bioengineer that shit. You don't need to actually take it from the planet. You can bioengineer that shit. Hydroponics. You don't actually need to go to the planet to take it. Take a sample of the DNA and then grow that shit more efficiently. Like, there's no need to invade a planet like Earth. Now, if you're gonna hit me with the obvious, why then does the Empire want all these worlds? I mean, you have the largest territory. It's a social thing. It's more political and government based than anything. Also, having those resources, don't get me wrong. Like, I say everything's abundant in space, mind you, but people claim star systems. So, of course, claiming a star system far more important than also territory, FTL lanes, politics, as I said, citizenry, taxes. But that's the thing. In invasion things, you never see them like, oh yes, we're invading for tax purposes. We want to tax your people. And even then, you think the aliens would not simply invade, but be like, yo, we have far more forces than you. We can travel through space long distance. We're going to show up, and you're going to pay tithes to us. They almost never do that. And I mean, let's be honest. If you have FTL and you're up against a primitive world, just don't. Just don't. If they don't have spaceships and you have spaceships, you shouldn't lose. There's no reason for you to lose. Park in orbit. And when I say orbit, I mean don't even park in orbit. Just stay away from the planet. Bombard it. Hit it with a bioplague. Hit it with a nanoplague. There's no reason for you to invade if you want to actually just kill everything there. Nuke the planet from orbit. Like there's no reason to invade. Why are you sending ground forces? I mean, that's the thing. In these sci-fis, the aliens always they always commit mass atrocities. They don't just like not do that. So clearly there's no rule against them using bioplagues, but they just don't. There's no rule against them using nanoplagues apparently, but they just don't. Like there's really no good reason not to. Invade with robots, okay? Like if you really must invade with robots. Okay, what if our robots get nuke them? Nuke them. Like why would I suppose it's because in your Elysian media, your Earth always has to win in the end, but an actual space invasion force. I mean, no, no. I mean, to be fair, if the invaders are doing invasion for the reasons we do invasion, then maybe. I mean, if they want your infrastructure intact, yeah, then you have a debatable fighting chance. They're not going to orbitally bombard you. Even then, like if you actually have some reasonable preparation, you can build bunkers and so forth, and you can make it real hard. Gravity wells are not everything. Just because you're on the bottom end of the gravity well does not mean you'll automatically lose. It does not mean you'll automatically lose. It's the tech difference I'm talking about, not the fact that a planetary invasion is going on. A well-prepared world is a fortress. A well-prepared world is a fortress. And it's real hard to crack that fortress with like 5 ships, even if they're capital ships. Let me put it this way. In a peer-to-peer space engagement, one nation's tech level 16, the other nation's tech level 16. One brings 5 battleships. The other has no space fleet whatsoever. The space fleet's not winning just because they're a space fleet. No. Even if the planet has 0 ships, they have 0 ships. The space fleet's not winning. First of all, that planet can produce ships. They have basically infinite resources. Those 5 capital ships don't. Planet has infinite resources, 5 capital ships don't. Planet has free armor, basically, well, infinite armor, because you can just keep digging more bunkers. The starships have only as much armor as they brought with them. I suppose they can try and repair, but their armor's a lot thinner than the crust of a planet. The planet has so many more populations, so many more workers, so many more weapons. It's just not easy to invade a world. It's not easy if you're actually invading. Even with bombardment, peer to peer, it's not a simple task. They can fire up at you just as easily as you can fire down at them. I say, now I know, gravity wells, but you have a planet's worth of resources. It doesn't matter that you're in a gravity well. Yeah, it takes a bit more energy, a bit more cost to throw things up at them. A bit more cost. It's not going to make a difference if you have the backing of a planet. Even if they have millions of ships, you are still offsetting by the amount of resources you have. So it's not so easy to simply invade a world. Peer to peer. Assuming you want things intact, even if you don't want, still difficult. But yes. You need actual defenses for that to apply. You need actual space combat infrastructure. Now, a few nukes that aren't designed to really attack deep space targets are not going to do anywhere near as well. Which is why lower tech versus space fleet wins. But if you have the ability to throw up nukes or cannon shots or anything really in a reasonable manner, then you have a very good defense against invasion. It's all about scale, really, and capability. Anyway, I will be right back. My apologies. Hello. My apologies for that. It appears that I have a little Imperial meeting I'm supposed to attend. Not ideal. Not ideal. Not bad, just Imperial business. So, unfortunately, I think we will call it there. Tomorrow's Wobbling Wednesday. We'll actually work on this map. And then, we'll roll dice on Friday, I suppose. That's theoretically the plan. Let's see. Yes, my apologies for that. A bit shorter than usual, by a very little bit. But hopefully, we can get back to doing things. Anyway, thank you for stopping by, I suppose. And as always, I've been your host, Casimir Basilius, Imperial Lord, and yes. Anyway, my apologies, a bit distracted, Imperial business and all that. Anyway, it's not much of a problem, it's just, paperwork and all that. Anyway, as always, I've been your host, Casimir Basilius, and I hope that you, yes, you, have a wonderful day. And thank you for stopping by.